The executive boardroom hummed with tension 40 floors above Palo Alto glass walls, offering a view of Silicon Valley that stretched toward mountains turned gold by late afternoon sun. Victoria Prescott stood at the head of a table large enough to seat 20, her white Dior suit crisp despite the crisis that had stretched into its sixth week. The X-47 engine sat in the center like an altar to failed ambition, chrome and steel components, surrounded by laptops displaying error codes that 18 of the best engineering minds in California couldn't decipher. Smoke still hung in the air from the latest test. The fire suppression system had activated 17 minutes earlier, drenching Blake Thornton and his team in chemical foam that now puddled on Italian marble floors. Heinrich Schmidt sat in the front row with four members of his Autobahn delegation, their faces carved from Bavarian granite, revealing nothing. $127 million hung on whether this machine could run for more than 14 minutes without self-destructing. The maintenance door opened. Darius Holloway stepped through carrying a canvas tool bag, navy coveralls bearing grease stains that no amount of washing could erase. He was 34 but looked older in the fluorescent light, shoulders broad from years of physical labor hands, showing the calluses of someone who worked with metal and machinery. His dark skin caught the reflection of diagnostic screens as he moved toward the engine with the careful purpose of a man who knew he didn't belong but had been summoned anyway. Victoria's eyes tracked him like a predator identifying prey. Her platinum bob cut framed a face that had graced the covers of Fortune and Forbes features, arranged in an expression that combined beauty with the particular coldness of someone who had clawed their way to power and intended to keep it. She stepped away from the table, red-soled Louboutin heels clicking against marble with the rhythm of a countdown timer. A janitor! The words dripped with theatrical contempt designed to carry to every corner of the room. You think a janitor can fix what MIT engineers couldn't? Darius stopped 3 feet from the engine. His tool bag settled onto the floor with the soft thud of metal against canvas. When he spoke, his voice carried a calmness that seemed to irritate Victoria more than anger would have. Ma'am, I know engines. This one has. Here's a deal, maintenance boy. Victoria moved closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something expensive that probably cost more than his monthly rent. Fix this $2.3 million engine in 2 hours, and I'll marry you right here in front of these investors. The room went silent. Someone in the German delegation coughed. Blake Thornton's face flushed red, whether from embarrassment or suppressed laughter was unclear. Rachel Whitmore stared at her laptop screen with sudden fascination. Victoria leaned in, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that somehow carried to every microphone in the room. But when you fail, and you will, security escorts you out permanently. And I'll make sure every tech company in Silicon Valley knows your name. You'll be unemployable from here to Seattle. Darius met her eyes. Something flickered in his expression, not fear or uncertainty, but a kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing something others don't. His jaw tightened. Then he nodded once. The screen went black. White text appeared against darkness. You're wondering, did he fix it? Did she really marry him? Let's go back 18 months. The studio apartment in Oakland measured 420 square feet, every inch organized with the precision of someone who couldn't afford wasted space. Morning light filtered through thin curtains, illuminating a kitchen table that doubled as homework station, and dinner table and late-at-night workspace for dreams deferred. Ivy Holloway sat in a mismatched chair wearing a NASA t-shirt 3 sizes too big, her 7-year-old frame swimming in cotton. She spooned cereal from a bowl chipped on one side, milk dribbling down her chin. The gap where her front tooth had fallen out 2 weeks earlier gave her smile a lopsided quality that somehow made it more genuine. Darius stood at the stove waiting for water to boil the 3rd pot of ramen noodles this week. His phone lay face up on the counter, banking app opened numbers that told a story of survival measured in dollars and cents. Current balance $143.67. Rent was due in 4 days. $865. The math didn't work. Hadn't worked for months, but somehow he made it work through a combination of overtime shifts and meals skipped and creative negotiations with landlords who occasionally showed mercy. On the shelf above the microwave sat a photograph in a simple black frame. Sienna Holloway smiled out from a moment frozen in time, her hand resting on her pregnant belly, joy radiating from features that would never age beyond 29. Darius had stopped looking directly at the photo months ago, trained himself to see it in peripheral vision, only because looking straight at it meant remembering the phone call from Oakland police, the clinical description of how a drunk driver had T-boned their Honda on I-580, how Sienna had died instantly, how Ivy had survived in her car seat without a scratch, protected by her mother's body in those final seconds. 4 years. Ivy had been 3. "Daddy, can we go to the Science Museum Saturday?" Her voice pulled him back to the present. He turned off the stove, poured steaming water over noodles that would constitute his breakfast, lunch, and probably dinner. "We'll see Ladybug. Money's tight right now." Ivy kicked her feet against the chair legs, a rhythm only children can sustain without thinking. Sienna's eyes studied him with an intelligence that sometimes unnerved him in its perceptiveness. "But you always say dreams are bigger than the sky." Her grin widened. Bigger than the sky. The phrase had started 2 years ago, his attempt to give her hope in a world that seemed determined to provide very little of it. Now it served as their private code, a reminder that poverty didn't have to mean small ambitions. The commute from Oakland to Palo Alto took 73 minutes door to door. Darius spent them reading technical journals downloaded to his phone, papers from SAE International, and journals he couldn't afford to subscribe to but accessed through library databases with his Oakland Public Library card. This morning it was an article on harmonic frequency optimization in hybrid drivetrain systems, mathematics, and engineering principles that felt like returning to a language he'd once spoken fluently. The voiceover in his head narrated the story he couldn't tell his daughter, not yet. Darius Holloway had mapped out his future at 17 with the precision of an engineer drafting blueprints. MIT Full Scholarship 2009, mechanical engineering with a focus on automotive systems. He'd lasted 3 semesters before his mother collapsed at her nursing shift, stage 4 lymphoma that had metastasized to her bones. He withdrew, came home, watched her die over 18 months while working night shifts at a UPS warehouse to pay for medications that insurance refused to cover. Oakland Community College accepted him 2 years later. He finished an associate's degree in automotive technology with a 4.0 GPA while working 3 jobs. Velocity Motors Detroit hired him as a junior engineer in 2013. He was 21 years old and felt like he'd reclaimed his stolen future. By 2015, he'd earned the title of lead propulsion engineer, 11 patents on hybrid balancing systems, his name appearing in industry journals and SAE conference proceedings. Then Sienna got pregnant with Ivy. They'd married in a small ceremony at Oakland City Hall, her family driving up from Los Angeles, his mother's grave decorated with flowers he couldn't afford. They moved to California for what Sienna called a better life, her optimism infectious enough to make him believe it. He took a position at a smaller automotive supplier. Good money, 60-hour weeks, pressure that ground him down, but felt manageable because he had Sienna to come home to. The drunk driver ended all that on a Tuesday evening in March 2018. Darius had been working late. Sienna was picking up Ivy from daycare. The police report said the other driver had a blood alcohol content of 0.21, nearly 3 times the legal limit that he'd blown through a red light at 60 miles per hour that Sienna never saw him coming. After the funeral, Darius couldn't sustain the engineering job. The long hours meant Ivy would spend more time in daycare than with him, and he couldn't bear that. He found the maintenance position at Vanguard Dynamics through a temp agency, $44,500 a year. Steady hours 6:30 to 3:30, home in time to pick Ivy up from school. Health benefits that covered pediatric checkups. It kept them afloat. Barely. Vanguard Dynamics rose from the Palo Alto landscape like a monument to venture capital ambition. 40 stories of glass and steel that caught morning sun and threw it back toward the sky. Darius arrived at 6:28, early enough to avoid most of the executive staff, late enough that security barely glanced at his ID badge. Facilities maintenance, access to every floor, every office, every laboratory, because someone had to empty the trash and someone had to mop the floors, and that someone needed to be invisible enough that important people could have sensitive conversations without remembering he existed. He started on the executive wing, 40th floor, rolling his cart past offices where million-dollar decisions got made over coffee that cost $8 a cup. Victoria Prescott's office sat at the corner windows on 2 sides furniture that probably cost more than Ivy's college fund would ever contain. The door stood slightly ajar. Voices filtered through. 6 weeks, Blake. 6 weeks, and we're no closer to solving this than when we started. Victoria's voice carried a tight control that suggested panic held barely in check. Darius slowed his cart, positioned himself to empty the recycling bin outside her door while appearing busy and therefore invisible. We've run 41 diagnostics, Victoria. Replaced the software twice, hardware 3 times. The sensors are calibrated to 0.01 millimeter accuracy. I don't know what else. The Autobahn investors arrive Friday. That's 72 hours from now. Heinrich Schmidt is flying 11 hours from Munich to see this engine perform. If it doesn't, he withdraws the Series B funding. $127 million. Gone. Do you understand what that means? Blake Thornton sounded like he was in his late 20s, voice carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who'd been working 100-hour weeks without breakthrough. MIT class of 2018, according to the plaque in his office. Darius had cleaned around it enough times to memorize the Latin inscription. I understand, but the harmonic oscillation won't stabilize past 14 minutes 38 seconds. The engine overheats, throws error code, H747, shuts itself down. We've tried everything I can think of and everything 3 consulting firms suggested. Victoria's heels clicked across her office floor, sharp reports that spoke of movement driven by frustration seeking outlet. Then we're finished. Payroll runs out in 4 months without new funding. We'll have to lay off 45% of staff just to extend runway another 60 days. Darius moved down the hall, but his mind stayed in that conversation. 45%, 96 people out of 214. His job would be among the first to go. The lab occupied half of the 38th floor clean room protocols abandoned in favor of crisis management. The X-47 engine sitting on a test stand surrounded by diagnostic equipment that looked like something from a science fiction film. Darius wheeled his cart through emptying trash bins that overflowed with energy drink cans and takeout containers. The engine itself drew his eye the way a puzzle draws fingers toward its pieces. He'd seen the technical specifications 3 weeks ago, documentation left on a conference table at midnight. Chrome housing, 8 cylinders, AI-guided fuel injection, calibrated to optimize efficiency in real time. Designed to power autonomous delivery vehicles with 94% efficiency, revolutionary if it worked, worthless if it kept self-destructing every 14 minutes. The specifications listed manufacturing origin Munich, BMW Group plant, DIN standards. That detail had caught his attention because it suggested a possibility that engineers focused on software might not consider. The engine sat silent now, cooling from whatever test had run earlier. Darius moved closer under his guise of emptying a nearby bin. His eyes tracked the crankshaft housing the sensor mounts, the connection points between German-manufactured hardware and California-developed software. A theory formed in his mind, fragments of knowledge from his Velocity Motors days combining with observations from weeks of cleaning around failed tests. Metric versus imperial. DIN tolerance standards versus SAE assumptions. German precision machine to 0.001 millimeter accuracy. American firmware expecting 0.005-inch tolerance, which converted to 0.127 millimeters. The AI would interpret German precision as sensor malfunction. Try to compensate, create cumulative phase errors that manifested as harmonic oscillation and eventually overheating. He'd seen this exact problem in 2016 on the Velocity Apex Hybrid. Different scale, same physics. The lab door opened. Rachel Whitmore entered carrying a tablet. She looked up, noticed him, smiled with the particular friendliness people use when they want to demonstrate they're not prejudiced. Oh, hey, thanks for keeping this place clean. You guys do such good work. Really hard-working people. The phrase landed like it always did, coded language wrapped in superficial politeness. You people. Hard-working as if the baseline assumption was otherwise. Darius nodded, said nothing, pushed his cart toward the exit. Victoria appeared in the lab doorway as he approached. Her eyes swept over him with the kind of assessment that classified him as furniture, something to be moved around or ignored depending on convenience. She stepped directly into his path, forcing him to stop. Excuse me, this is a restricted R&D area. Maintenance cleans after 8 p.m. Yes, ma'am, just finishing. Blake. She turned toward the back of the lab. Do we really need custodial staff near sensitive prototypes? What if something gets damaged? We can't afford liability from unqualified personnel. Blake's face flushed. He's just cleaning, Victoria. Make sure that's all he's doing. The words hung in the air as Victoria swept past. Darius caught Blake's expression in that moment, discomfort mixed with resignation. Rachel had returned her attention to her tablet, deliberately oblivious. Darius pushed his cart into the hallway. His hands gripped the handle tight enough that his knuckles went pale. 4 years of this. 4 years of being invisible, of swallowing insults, coded in professional language. Thursday afternoon brought the emergency all-hands meeting, mandatory attendance 4 p.m. Darius sent a quick text to Mrs. Foster explaining he'd be late, $20 became $30 for evening hours, and joined the stream of employees heading toward the auditorium. The room filled with nervous energy. Darius found a spot near the back, close to the emergency exit. Victoria took the stage at 4:03 precisely. I'll be direct. The X-47 engine represents 6 years of development and $2.3 million in R&D investment. Autobahn Ventures arrives tomorrow at 2 p.m. for our demonstration. If the engine fails, they withdraw their Series B commitment, $127 million. She paused, let that number settle. Without that funding, Vanguard Dynamics cannot sustain current operations. We'll be forced to implement immediate workforce reduction. 45%. The room erupted in whispers. Blake, would you walk everyone through the technical situation? Blake Rose clicked through slides. We've attempted 41 different solutions. The pattern remains consistent. Engine runs smoothly for 14 minutes, 38 seconds, then begins oscillating at approximately 27 hertz, overheats, and shuts down with error code H747, harmonic disruption detected. He clicked to a graph showing the failure pattern. At this point, we've exhausted conventional solutions. Metric imperial tolerance mismatch, creating cumulative phase error in the crankshaft harmonics. The words left Darius's mouth before his brain fully processed the decision to speak. 213 heads turned. The silence that followed felt like pressure change before a storm. Victoria's eyes found him. I'm sorry, and you are? Darius stood. Darius Holloway, ma'am. Facilities maintenance. Facilities. Sabanas. Maintenance. She repeated each word separately, investing them with theatrical emphasis. So, a janitor thinks he understands quantum harmonic engineering better than our MIT graduates. Scattered laughter rippled through the room. Darius kept his voice level. Ma'am, I'm not trying to overstep. I just think, do you have a degree in mechanical engineering? I have an associate's degree in automotive technology from Oakland Community College. Victoria's face arranged itself in exaggerated surprise. Community college, how adorable. The laughter grew louder. Blake Thornton stared at his shoes. Near the front, a woman with white hair pulled into a tight bun, Margaret Sullivan, watched Darius with intensity. Victoria descended from the stage, walked up the aisle until she stood 10 feet from Darius. Mr. Holloway, your job is to empty trash cans and mop floors. Those are valuable functions, essential even. But leave the thinking to people with actual qualifications. People who spent years earning degrees that prove they understand complex technical systems. The words landed like punches designed not to physically harm, but to wound in ways that would last longer. Darius felt his jaw clench, felt the familiar sensation of forcing his face into neutral expression, while fury burned behind his eyes. Sit down, Mr. Holloway. He sat. The meeting continued. Victoria outlined contingency plans, discussed timeline for potential layoffs. The words washed over Darius without penetrating. His mind had already moved past humiliation into calculation mode. He knew exactly what was wrong with the X-47 engine, knew how to fix it with a $50 part he could machine in 3 hours. The meeting ended at 5:12. Darius remained seated until only a few stragglers remained. Dr. Sullivan appeared beside him without warning. Walk with me. They moved through empty hallways toward the elevator. Sullivan stabbed the button for the 40th floor. That was specific. Metric imperial mismatch. DIN versus SAE standards. Most janitors don't know what those acronyms mean. Darius kept his eyes on the floor numbers. I used to work in automotive before you became a janitor, before my wife died and I needed steady hours to raise my daughter. The elevator opened onto the executive floor. Sullivan led him to her office, closed the door, opened her laptop, and pulled up a file directory. I checked after the meeting. You've submitted 4 technical reports over the past 2 years through the employee suggestion system, all rejected by HR as outside submitters' scope of expertise. She turned the laptop toward him. Darius leaned forward. His first report had identified a quality control issue causing 0.3% failure rate. Cost per failure, $47,000. His proposed solution, adjust torque specifications on 3 bolts. Cost 0. Status rejected, facilities personnel lack technical credentials. The second, third, and fourth met identical fates. Why are you showing me this? Sullivan closed the laptop. Because I review all QA documentation, including rejected employee submissions. And Darius, your reports were brilliant. Victoria's been throwing away talent because it doesn't come wrapped in Ivy League diplomas. She pulled a folder from her desk drawer. Inside documentation of 17 other submissions over the past 2.5 years, all from employees in non-engineering roles, all technically sound, all rejected by the same HR filter. I've been documenting this for 18 months, but I'm 58 years old and 6 years from retirement, and I can't afford to make waves that'll cost me my pension. You, though, she studied him. You've got nothing left to lose, do you? Darius thought of Ivy's gap-toothed smile, her absolute faith that her father could fix anything. I've got everything to lose. But you're right that I'll lose it anyway if that engine doesn't work tomorrow. The BART train back to Oakland carried Darius through darkness. Mrs. Foster's apartment occupied the second floor. Ivy was asleep on the couch, small body curled around a stuffed elephant. Mrs. Foster sat reading a paperback thriller. Late meeting. I'm sorry. Here's 40. He held out two 20s. Foster waved them away. Child's asleep. You're stressed. Keep your money. But Darius insisted press the bills into her hand because charity corroded something essential. He carried Ivy upstairs, her weight negligible against his shoulder. Their apartment looked smaller each time he entered it. He laid her in the bed they shared and pulled a thin blanket to her chin. Ivy's eyes opened. Daddy, I'm here, Ladybug. Did you fix the big machine? They won't let me touch it, baby. Why not? Because sometimes people don't see what you can do. They only see what you look like. Ivy's eyes closed again, but her voice emerged one more time. That's silly. You taught me actions are bigger than the sky. That's right. He sat beside her for 20 minutes after she'd fully returned to sleep. Eventually, he rose, moved to the kitchen table, opened his laptop, and began to calculate. The X-47 engine's failure pattern pointed to harmonic resonance caused by the AI firmware, misinterpreting manufacturing precision as sensor error. German parts maintained tolerances of plus or minus 0.001 millimeters. The AI assumed SAE tolerances of plus or minus 0.005 inches, which converted to 0.127 millimeters. That hundredfold difference created a cascade of errors. The firmware continuously tried to compensate for what it perceived as defects, making microsecond adjustments. These compensations accumulated, creating phase mismatch that manifested as 27 Hz oscillation. At 14 minutes 38 seconds, the oscillation reached resonance with the engine block. Temperature spiked, shutdown. The solution was elegant, a harmonic damper installed between crankshaft and flywheel precision, tuned to absorb the 27 Hz frequency before it could reach resonance. He'd designed similar dampers at Velocity Motors. The physics were identical, just scaled differently. He opened SolidWorks and began modeling. 8.2 centimeters in diameter, 1.1 centimeters thick, brass tungsten alloy. He ran simulations until 3 in the morning, adjusting parameters, verifying calculations. Sleep came reluctantly, populated by dreams of engines that wouldn't start and Sienna's voice asking him why he'd given up. He woke at 5:30 to Ivy shaking his shoulder. Daddy, you were talking in your sleep about engines. He pulled her into a hug that lasted longer than usual. Friday morning broke clear and cold. Darius went through his routine with mechanical precision ramen for breakfast, Ivy to Mrs. Foster's. By 6:05 BART train at 6:15, Vanguard Dynamics hummed with anticipatory anxiety when he arrived at 6:42. Engineers who normally arrived at 9 were already present, clustered around the engine. At 10:17, Heinrich Schmidt arrived. Darius was cleaning the 40th floor break room when the elevator opened. 5 people in dark European suits. Heinrich himself was 55, steel gray hair, combed straight back. Victoria emerged to greet them. Heinrich, welcome. Heinrich spoke to his assistant in German. Hoffentlich ist diese Firma so kompetent, wie behauptet. Hopefully this company is as competent as claimed. Darius responded before considering consequences. Wir geben unser Bestes, mein Herr. We're doing our best, sir. Heinrich's head snapped towards him. Victoria's smile froze. Sie sprechen Deutsch. Ein bisschen. Victoria closed the distance in 4 strides. Mr. Holloway. My office, now. The German delegation watched with interest. Darius set down his cleaning supplies and followed Victoria. She shut the door with force. How dare you speak to our investors? Who do you think you are? Someone who speaks 4 languages, ma'am. I don't care if you speak 12 languages. You're maintenance. You don't interact with executive-level guests. Ever. With respect, he addressed me directly. This is your final warning. One more incident, one more and you're terminated. No severance, no reference. You'll be unhireable in this valley. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. Good. Now get out and stay out of sight until this demonstration concludes. Darius left. His hands were shaking. He found a restroom on the 35th floor and stood at the sink, running cold water over his wrists. The mirror showed him a face he barely recognized. 34, but looking 40. 4 years of grinding poverty had carved away everything soft. He thought about Ivy asking if he'd fix the machine. He thought about the 73 rejected submissions Sullivan had shown him. He thought about his own 4 reports gathering digital dust. The decision formed slowly. He would fix that engine. Tonight, after everyone left, he would install the damper. And tomorrow when Heinrich arrived for the demonstration, that engine would run. Maybe he'd be fired, maybe arrested, maybe sued into bankruptcy. But Ivy would see that her father fought back, that invisible didn't mean powerless, that dreams bigger than the sky required actions that matched their scale. He dried his hands and returned to his cart. The day stretched ahead, hours to fill with cleaning and calculated invisibility, while his mind refined the plan forming in the spaces between conscious thought. But what Darius didn't know yet, what he couldn't know, was that this single decision would set in motion consequences far beyond one engine, one company, one man's fight for recognition. The 73 rejected submissions weren't accidents. They were evidence of something larger, more systemic, more corrosive than he'd imagined. And Victoria's fear wasn't just about credentials. It was about control slipping through fingers that had never learned to hold anything except power wrapped in process. Tomorrow would reveal whether expertise could survive contact with institutional prejudice, whether one man's knowledge earned through sweat and loss and midnight calculations could break through barriers designed to keep people like him permanently invisible, whether dreams bigger than the sky could be built from materials salvaged from poverty's wreckage. The engine waited in its lab, silent, broken, ready to become either his vindication or his final humiliation. Friday morning stretched into afternoon through a haze of forced normalcy. Darius pushing his maintenance cart through corridors where engineers moved with the frantic energy of people aware their futures balanced on the edge of a demonstration scheduled for 2 p.m. He avoided the 38th floor, entirely kept himself 3 floors away from the lab, where Blake Thornton's team would be conducting final preparations, aware that Victoria's warning had real teeth, and that his presence anywhere near the X-47 engine would provide excuse enough for immediate termination. At 11:47, his phone buzzed. Mrs. Foster's number. His chest tightened as he answered, already calculating how quickly he could reach Oakland if Ivy was hurt or sick or in trouble. "Mr. Holloway, I'm so sorry to bother you at work." Mrs. Foster's voice carried an apologetic tone that immediately signaled the problem wasn't Ivy's health, but something adjacent. "Oakwood Elementary just called. There was an incident." The word incident in the context of elementary schools meant violence or racism or both categories that overlapped more often than administrators wanted to acknowledge. Darius checked his watch, calculated travel time, weighed the certain consequences of leaving work against the equally certain consequences of abandoning his daughter when she needed him. "What kind of incident?" "Something about the science fair. The principal asked if you could come in. She said Ivy is, well, she's upset." 23 minutes on BART plus 12-minute walk brought Darius to Oakwood Elementary at 12:31, the brick building looking exactly as he remembered from his own childhood in this neighborhood 3 decades ago. The office receptionist recognized him, waved him through to Principal Vanderberg's office without requiring the usual visitor check-in process. Ivy sat in a chair that dwarfed her small frame, her NASA t-shirt stained with something that looked like baking soda paste, her face blotchy from crying that had clearly been extensive and recent. She launched herself at Darius the moment he entered, arms wrapping around his waist with desperate strength. Principal Vanderberg rose from behind her desk, a white woman in her 50s whose expression combined professional sympathy with the particular exhaustion of someone tired of mediating conflicts she couldn't actually solve. A man sat in the other visitor chair, expensive suit suggesting tech industry success, face arranged in smug satisfaction that set Darius's teeth on edge. "Mr. Holloway, thank you for coming so quickly." Vanderberg gestured toward the empty chair beside the smug man. "This is Gregory Whitmore. His son is in Ivy's class." Darius remained standing, one hand on Ivy's shoulder. "What happened?" Whitmore spoke before Vanderberg could answer, voice carrying the casual authority of someone accustomed to being heard and believed. "There was an unfortunate misunderstanding at the science fair this morning. My son Ethan has been working on a quite sophisticated project involving solar panel efficiency optimization. Very advanced for 4th grade, Shirin. When we were setting up, I may have made an observation that some children benefit from parental involvement in STEM projects, while others, well, not everyone has those advantages." The coded language landed exactly as intended. Darius felt Ivy's grip on his waist tighten. He forced his voice to remain level, despite rage climbing his spine. "You implied my daughter couldn't have built her project herself because I'm just a janitor." "I didn't say janitor." Whitmore's smile remained fixed, enjoying this. "I simply noted that some parents work at Google, Tesla, prestigious firms where technical knowledge is part of the job. Others work in service positions. That's not judgment, just observation." "Your observation made my daughter cry." Each word came out precise, clipped Darius using the control he'd learned over 4 years of swallowing insults to avoid escalation that would only hurt Ivy more. Vanderberg intervened, her tone suggesting she'd rather be anywhere else. Mr. Whitmore has apologized to Ivy. I think we can consider this matter. No. Ivy's voice emerged small but determined. She pulled away from Darius, faced Whitmore directly despite tear tracks still visible on her face. I built my volcano myself. I read 3 library books about chemical reactions. I calculated the baking soda to vinegar ratio for optimal eruption height. My daddy helped me with the measurements, but I did the science. Whitmore's expression shifted toward condescension masquerading as patience. Of course you did, sweetheart. I'm sure your father helped as much as he could. My father is an engineer. Ivy's voice grew stronger. He used to design car engines. He has 11 patents. Darius's heart fractured and reformed in the space between one breath and another. He'd never told Ivy about velocity motors, never shared that part of his past because it felt like bragging about a life that no longer existed. But apparently she'd listened when he explained torque specifications while helping her build the volcano, had absorbed enough context to understand that her father's knowledge came from somewhere deeper than YouTube tutorials. Whitmore turned that condescension toward Darius. You're an engineer. Which company? I'm at Horizon Ventures, VP of Product. Always interested in meeting other technical professionals. The trap was obvious. Darius could claim his Velocity Motors history, expose himself to follow-up questions about why he was working, maintenance, provide entertainment for a man who clearly enjoyed watching people squirm. Or he could retreat into silence, confirm Whitmore's assumptions, teach Ivy that fights were better avoided than won. He chose the third option, the one Isaiah Holloway had modeled in Detroit garages when white customers questioned his competence. My daughter built that volcano. I watched her calculate reaction rates. I checked her math. She earned every bit of knowledge that went into that project. Whether I work at Google or sweep floors at Google doesn't change the quality of her science. Vanderberg seized the opening for diplomatic exit. I think we're all in agreement that Ivy's project is excellent. Mr. Whitmore, thank you for coming in. Mr. Holloway, I hope Ivy feels comfortable returning to class Monday. Whitmore stood, adjusted his suit jacket, delivered a parting shot wrapped in false friendliness. Of course, no hard feelings. I simply believe in acknowledging reality. Some children have advantages, others don't. Better to learn that early than face disappointment later. He left. Vanderberg made apologetic noises that Darius barely heard, his mind already moving past this incident or toward the larger pattern it represented. Ivy would face versions of Gregory Whitmore her entire life, people who would look at her skin color and her father's, and her zip code and decide her potential before she opened her mouth. He could shield her from some of it, but she'd need to learn how to fight these battles herself. Outside the school, Ivy's hand found his as they walked toward the BART station. The afternoon sun felt too bright, California weather indifferent to human drama playing out beneath its warmth. Daddy, why do people think you're not smart? The question carved through his remaining composure. He stopped walking, knelt to her eye level on the sidewalk, aware of pedestrians flowing around them, but caring more about this moment than social conventions about blocking foot traffic. Because they judge by appearances, not abilities. They see my uniform and they make assumptions. But that's not fair. No, it's not. But fairness isn't something the world gives you. It's something you have to fight for. Ivy's eyes searched his face, looking for something he hoped she found. Are you going to fix the big machine at work? Show them you're smart? They won't let me near it, remember. Then make them let you. Her 7-year-old certainty contained a clarity that adults spent lifetimes trying to recapture. You always say, if they won't open the door, build your own door. He had said that 2 years ago when she'd been afraid to join the science club because the other kids said girls weren't good at science. He'd told her that closed doors were invitations to carpentry. Now his own advice echoed back at him through her voice, demanding he practice what he preached. You're right, Ladybug. You're absolutely right. They continued to the BART station, rode back toward Palo Alto in afternoon commuter traffic that pressed humanity into metal tubes and carried them along predetermined paths. Darius let Ivy sit by the window, watched her face as she tracked passing landscape, wondered what kind of world she'd inherit and whether he could bend its trajectory even fractionally toward justice. His phone showed 2:17. The demonstration would be underway. Either the engine was running or it had failed again. Either Victoria had secured her funding or she was calculating layoff schedules. In 5 hours, he'd return to the building, execute the plan he'd been refining since midnight, install the harmonic damper that would solve a problem nobody had authorized him to touch. Mrs. Foster met them at the Oakland apartment building entrance, took one look at Ivy's blotchy face and swollen eyes, pulled her into a hug that spoke of decades spent comforting children who'd encountered the world's casual cruelties. Science fair didn't go well. A man was mean about Daddy's job. Ivy's voice came muffled against Mrs. Foster's shoulder. But Daddy stood up for me, and I'm going to be a scientist anyway. That's right. Mrs. Foster met Darius's eyes over Ivy's head, understanding passing between two people who'd both navigated racism's exhausting daily accumulation. You're going to be whatever you want. Don't let anyone tell you different. Darius left them there, Foster volunteering to keep Ivy for the afternoon without being asked, both of them recognizing he needed time to prepare for whatever came next. He climbed to the third floor, entered his apartment, sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and a determination that felt like falling, except in reverse, like rising against gravity through sheer refusal to accept physics as destiny. The harmonic damper design needed final verification before fabrication. He ran simulations again, checked his calculations for the 1,000th time, confirmed that brass tungsten alloy at the specified dimensions would absorb 27 Hz oscillation without introducing resonance at other frequencies. The math was solid, the physics were proven. All that remained was execution. His phone buzzed. Dr. Sullivan. Text message. Engine failed. 14 minutes, 41 seconds this time. 3 seconds longer, but same outcome. Victoria is with the Germans now. Don't know what she's telling them. I'll leave the lab door unlocked tonight. Third floor server room key card taped under the maintenance card handle. You didn't hear this from me. Darius stared at the message until the screen darkened. Sullivan was risking her pension, her retirement, her entire professional future by providing access and plausible deniability. She'd positioned him to succeed while giving herself cover if he failed the careful strategy of someone who'd survived decades in hostile corporate environments. He typed a response. Why are you doing this? Her answer came immediately. Because I'm tired of watching excellence get discarded for lack of pedigree. Because my son is a welder who can't get hired anywhere that matters despite being the best in Northern California. Because somebody has to break the pattern. Might as well be you. At 6:30, Darius collected Ivy from Mrs. Foster's apartment, made them dinner from ingredients stretched to their limit. Pasta with butter and frozen vegetables, protein sacrificed to keep grocery costs under $40 for the week. Ivy sensed his preoccupation didn't press him for conversation beyond the basics of her day. After dinner, she worked on homework at the kitchen table, while Darius pretended to watch television, his mind actually running through the installation procedure he'd need to execute in darkness and silence. 8:15. Ivy's bedtime. He tucked her in, pulling the thin blanket to her chin, kissing her forehead, where her skin still carried the baby softness that would eventually disappear into adolescence. Daddy, are you going back to work tonight? The question caught him mid-retreat. He paused in the doorway, silhouetted by hallway light. Yes, I need to fix something that's broken. The big machine? Yes. Will you get in trouble? Honesty warred with paternal instinct to shield her from adult complications. Honesty won because lies would undermine everything he was trying to teach her about integrity and courage. Maybe. Probably. But sometimes doing the right thing means accepting consequences. Ivy sat up, her gap-toothed seriousness, making her look simultaneously younger and older than 7. Remember when I was scared to do the volcano at science fair? You said scared means it matters. Do it anyway. His own words returning to haunt him, demanding he meet the standard he'd set for her. I did say that. So if you're scared, that means fixing the machine matters. Do it anyway. He crossed back to her bed, pulled her into a hug that lasted longer than usual, breathing in the strawberry shampoo scent of her hair and the indefinable smell of childhood that he knew intellectually wouldn't last forever, but couldn't quite believe would actually disappear. When did you get so wise? From you, you taught me dreams are bigger than the sky. Bigger than the sky. He repeated it like a prayer or maybe a promise. I'm gonna fix it, Ladybug. For you, for everyone like us who gets told they don't belong. I know you will. Her confidence remained absolute, untouched by doubt that would come later with experience. Because you're my daddy, and you can fix anything. He left her there, grabbed his tool bag from the closet, checked that he had everything he'd need, digital calipers, precision, screwdrivers, the design specifications on his phone, 3 energy bars because he didn't know how long this would take. The harmonic damper itself sat in bubble wrap at the bottom of the bag, machined this afternoon at a friend's garage, in exchange for 3 hours of labor, helping replace brake lines on a 1987 Chevy pickup. The friend hadn't asked questions, recognized desperation when he saw. It understood that some debts were better repaid with silence than inquiry. 943. Darius emerged onto Oakland streets where darkness pooled between streetlights and the sound of distant sirens reminded everyone that urban life contained edges sharp enough to draw blood. He walked to BART rather than waiting for a bus that might not come, descended into fluorescent brightness, and mechanical air rode the train through the tunnel under the bay while his heart rate climbed with each station. Palo Alto at 11:07 felt like a different planet from Oakland streets, clean and well lit. The ambient wealth so normalized that people forgot poverty existed 3 cities away. Vanguard Dynamics rose against the night sky windows, dark except for security lighting on every fifth floor, and the executive suite at the top where someone Victoria probably was still working through scenarios that all led to the same conclusion: failure meant collapse. The loading dock security guard was reading something on his phone, barely glanced up as Darius showed his ID badge. Night shift maintenance, nothing unusual about that. He nodded. Darius threw returned attention to his screen, where a soccer match was apparently reaching critical conclusion. The building's overnight silence felt different from daytime quiet, absence of human activity, creating a vacuum that amplified every sound. Darius's footsteps echoed in the lobby. The elevator hummed its ascent with mechanical indifference. The 38th floor corridor stretched empty and waiting. His maintenance cart sat exactly where Sullivan had promised, keycard taped to the handle with surgical precision. The lab door responded to the keycard with an electronic chirp that sounded impossibly loud in the stillness. Darius slipped through, let the door close behind him, stood for 30 seconds, allowing his eyes to adjust to darkness, broken only by standby lights on diagnostic equipment. The X-47 engine squatted on its test stand like a sleeping animal, chrome catching reflections and throwing them back toward walls that had witnessed 6 weeks of failure. He approached slowly, setting his tool bag down with care that prevented metal-on-metal sounds. His phone provided illumination, bluish LED glow that turned everything ghostly but gave him enough light to work. He'd memorized the disassembly procedure during afternoon review sessions, knew exactly which 12 bolts needed removal. To access the crankshaft assembly, understood that he'd need to work with surgical precision because reassembly had to be perfect or the engine would fail for entirely different reasons. The first bolt came free at 11:23. The second took longer, to some engineer having over-torqued it during initial assembly, forcing Darius to apply pressure that made sweat break out on his forehead despite the climate-controlled environment. By 11:47, he'd exposed the crankshaft, the precisely machined German steel that represented thousands of hours of engineering development and millions of dollars in R&D investment. The harmonic damper emerged from bubble wrap like a holy relic, brass tungsten alloy, catching phone light and seeming to glow from within. 8.2 centimeters in diameter, 1.1 centimeters thick, mass balanced to 0.0003 millimeter tolerance. Darius had made this with his own hands, machined it on equipment that wasn't quite precise enough, hand finishing it with files and patience until measurements satisfied requirements that most people couldn't achieve with computer-controlled tools. Installation required absolute concentration. The damper had to seat perfectly between crankshaft and flywheel. Any misalignment would introduce vibrations worse than the problem it solved. He worked slowly, checking alignment with digital calipers every few seconds, torquing mounting bolts to exactly 47 Newton meters, using a wrench he'd calibrated against known standards. Midnight passed. 12:30, 1 a.m. The installation procedure that should have taken 40 minutes stretched toward 90 as Darius triple-checked every measurement, verified every connection, ensured that nothing in his modification would create liability or danger. This wasn't sabotage, despite what Victoria might claim. This was engineering performed to standards higher than most professionals bothered to meet. At 1:43, the reassembly was complete. The engine looked identical to how he'd found it, except for the damper, now integrated into its drivetrain, invisible modification that would transform failure into success. Darius packed his tools, erased evidence of his presence, paused with his hand on the door handle. If this worked, he'd just saved 96 jobs. If it failed, he'd destroyed his own life and possibly faced criminal charges. The stakes balanced on a piece of metal, smaller than a coffee mug, on calculations he'd run 1,000 times, on faith in physics that had never yet betrayed him. He left the lab at 1:58, descended to the loading dock, past the security guard, who was now watching a different match, or maybe the same one in overtime. The night air felt cold after climate-controlled interior, shocking his system into alertness that pushed away exhaustion. He walked to BART Road, empty trains, through early morning hours when only shift workers and insomniacs populated public transportation, emerged into Oakland as Friday became Saturday. Mrs. Foster's apartment showed no lights. Darius climbed to the third floor as quietly as possible, entered his own space, stripped off clothes that smelled like machine oil and fierce sweat. Ivy slept undisturbed, her small body barely making an impression in the mattress they shared. He stood watching her for 5 minutes, memorizing this moment before everything changed one direction or another. Saturday morning arrived with fog rolling in from the bay, turning the world gray and indistinct. Ivy woke at 7:30, found Darius already awake at the kitchen table, laptop open to news sites that carried no information about Vanguard dynamics or engine failures or anything that mattered to the narrow corridor of his concerns. Did you fix it? Her first words, not good morning or I'm hungry, just the question that mattered most. I installed a component that should solve the problem. Whether it works, we'll find out this afternoon. Can I come watch? Absolutely not. The words came out sharper than intended. He softened his voice, pulled her close. This might go very wrong, Ladybug. If it does, I don't want you there to see it. But if it goes right, I want to see you win. Her logic was irrefutable and heartbreaking in equal measure. He kissed the top of her head, promised they'd celebrate when it was over, made breakfast that neither of them had much appetite for. At noon, his phone rang. Dr. Sullivan. He answered with dread coiling in his stomach. Darius, you need to get here. Now. What happened? Victoria came in early, found the engine. She knows someone modified it overnight. Security is reviewing footage. She's calling an emergency meeting for 1:30. If you're not here, she'll know it was you. I'll be there in 40 minutes. He ended the call, turned to Ivy, who'd been listening with the intense focus children bring to adult conversations they're not supposed to hear. I have to go to work. Emergency meeting. Because you fixed the engine. Because someone fixed the engine and they're trying to figure out who. Are you going to tell them? The question hung between them, pregnant with implications about integrity and strategy and what lessons he wanted to impart. Darius knelt to her eye level, took her small hands in his calloused ones. I'm going to let the engine speak for itself. If it works, then we'll talk about who fixed it. If it doesn't work, then it doesn't matter who tried. Ivy nodded with seriousness beyond her years. Bigger than the scamandum. Bigger than the skate, Mrs. Foster agreed to take Ivy for the afternoon, waved away payment with the explanation that some things transcended transactions. Darius rode BART through midday, crowd's anxiety building with each station. By the time he reached Vanguard Dynamics at 1:08, his hands were shaking despite conscious effort to maintain calm. The building's energy had shifted from yesterday's frantic preparation to something darker, an anger looking for targets. Employees clustered in small groups, whispering urgently, their body language suggesting scandal or crisis or both. Darius kept his head down, pushed his maintenance cart toward the elevators, tried to project normalcy despite everything screaming that normal had left the building sometime around midnight. Victoria's voice reached him before he saw her, sharp and furious, carrying from the 40th floor conference room where she'd apparently corralled her senior staff. Someone accessed that lab without authorization. Someone modified our proprietary engine. This is industrial sabotage, and I will find out who's responsible. Blake Thornton's voice responded a lower member, harder to make out. Victoria, if someone fixed it, maybe we should. Fixed it. We don't know if they fixed anything. They could have introduced new problems, created liability, violated our insurance protocols. We run demonstrations on equipment that's been certified by authorized personnel, not tampered with by unauthorized actors. Darius reached the 38th floor at 1:27. The lab door stood open, 3 security personnel inside, examining the engine, while a 4th reviewed laptop footage that would show nothing useful. Darius had been careful to work in camera blind spots, a skill learned during 4 years of understanding exactly where surveillance coverage existed and where it didn't. Dr. Sullivan appeared beside him without warning her approach, silent, despite sensible shoes. Her face carried worry mixed with something that might have been admiration or possibly concern that she'd enabled a disaster. She's convinced it's sabotage. Won't listen to anyone suggesting we should test the engine to see if the modification actually works. What about Heinrich, the demonstration? Postponed. Victoria told him we discovered unauthorized tampering, needed 24 hours to verify security. He was not pleased, gave her until Monday, 2 p.m. for final demonstration or the deal dies. Monday meant 2 more days of investigation, 2 more days for security to potentially trace the 3rd floor keycard to Sullivan's authorization codes, 2 more days for Victoria to build a case that would justify criminal charges. Darius felt the walls closing in options, narrowing to a corridor that led only one direction. I need to tell her it was me. Sullivan grabbed his arm with surprising strength. You do that now, she'll have you arrested before you finish the sentence. Wait until the meeting. At least you'll have witnesses. The all-hands meeting convened at 1:47 in the second-floor auditorium, same space where Victoria had issued layoff warnings 2 days ago. This time her expression carried fury instead of desperation, face arranged in lines that promised consequences for whoever had dared violate her authority. The German delegation sat in the front row again, Heinrich's expression carved from disappointment and irritation. Beside him sat his assistant and three other Autobahn executives who'd apparently flown 11 hours to watch American corporate dysfunction play out in real time. Victoria took the podium without preamble. Last night, someone entered our R&D lab without authorization and modified the X-47 engine. This represents theft of proprietary technology, violation of insurance protocols, and potential industrial sabotage. Security is reviewing all access records and surveillance footage. The person responsible will be terminated immediately and prosecuted to the fullest extent of law. She paused, eyes scanning the auditorium with predatory focus. If the person responsible comes forward now, we'll consider that cooperation when determining criminal charges. Otherwise, we'll find you, and I promise the consequences will be severe. Darius stood, 214 heads swiveled toward him again, repetition of yesterday's scene, except this time carried stakes that went beyond humiliation into territory that included jail time. Victoria's eyes found him narrowed with recognition that became certainty. "Mr. Holloway, you have something to say." His voice came out steady despite adrenaline flooding his system. "Yes, ma'am, I modified the engine last night, between midnight and 2 a.m. The auditorium erupted in whispers. Victoria's face cycled through vindication rage and something that looked almost like relief at having identified her target. "Security." She gestured toward two uniformed guards stationed at the auditorium exits. "Escort Mr. Holloway to my office. Everyone else, this meeting is concluded. Return to your duties." Heinrich Schmidt stood before security, could move. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to commanding rooms and expecting compliance. "Ms. Prescott, one moment. This man modified your engine without permission." "Correct." "That's correct. Criminal trespass, theft of trade Dweinrich's industrial. But you have not tested whether his modification works." Heinrich spoke over her German precision, slicing through American outrage. "You have not determined if he solved your 6-week failure?" Victoria's jaw tightened. The testing protocols require authorized personnel, insurance compliance, safety verification. "I am not interested in protocols." Heinrich's voice dropped to conversational volume that somehow carried more weight than shouting. "I am interested in whether your engine functions. I flew 11 hours. My delegation cleared schedules for 3 days. We will see this engine operate, or we will withdraw from negotiations permanently. Now, not Monday. Now." Silence filled the auditorium, 200 people holding collective breath while Victoria calculated odds and options and consequences. Her eyes found Darius again, and something shifted in her expression, some microscopic acknowledgement that she'd been backed into a corner where her only escape route led through trusting the man she'd spent 2 days destroying. "Fine." The word emerged, clipped, controlled fury compressed into 2 syllables. "We'll test the engine. But when it fails, Mr. Holloway faces full criminal prosecution. And when it succeeds, if by some miracle it succeeds, I will discover how he acquired unauthorized access, and everyone who assisted him will face termination." She descended from the stage heels, clicking toward the exit, everyone falling into step behind her like a procession heading toward execution or maybe resurrection. Darius joined the flow, Sullivan appearing beside him. Without speaking, her presence both support and testimony to shared risk. The 38th floor lab had never held this many people, engineers and executives and German investors crowding around the X-47 engine, while security footage played on wall-mounted monitors showing empty corridors that proved nothing. Victoria positioned herself near the control station where Blake Thornton stood ready to initiate the test sequence. Heinrich moved to stand directly beside Darius, examining him with frank curiosity that had nothing to do with color or class and everything to do with competence. "You are facilities maintenance, yes." "Yes, sir." "But you know automotive engineering." "I used to be lead propulsion engineer at Velocity Motors." Detroit. "Left the field when my wife died." Heinrich's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Velocity Apex Hybrid, the Motor Trend car of the year 2016. "Yes, sir, I designed the drivetrain harmonic balancing system." "That was elegant work. I read the SAE paper." "You are..." He paused, pulled out his phone, typed rapidly, studied the screen. "You are Darius Holloway. 11 patents. Why are you pushing maintenance cart?" "Because I have a 7-year-old daughter who needs health insurance, and can't wait for me to find engineering work that accommodates single father hours. Heinrich nodded slowly, expression suggesting he'd solved an equation that had been bothering him. And last night you installed what modification? Harmonic damper, brass tungsten alloy, 8.2 centimeters diameter, precision balanced to absorb the 27 hertz beating frequency caused by metric imperial tolerance mismatch between German manufacturing and American firmware assumptions. The technical specificity seemed to satisfy something in Heinrich's Germanic need for precision. He turned toward Victoria. Miss Prescott, I withdraw my earlier statement. We will not wait until Monday. We will see this test now. If Mr. Holloway's modification works, Autobahn increases our investment by 20%, and I want him consulting on our Munich facility. If it fails, you may prosecute him as you wish. Begin the test. Victoria's face had gone pale beneath expertly applied makeup. Her hands gripped the edge of the control station with enough force that her knuckles showed white. She looked at Blake. Thornton found no escape route. In his expression, turned her gaze toward Darius with something that might have been hatred or possibly fear that her entire worldview was about to shatter. Start the engine. Blake's fingers moved across the control interface, initiating sequences Darius had watched fail 42 times in the documentation he'd memorized. The engine roared to life, 8 cylinders firing in perfect synchronization sound that resonated in chest cavities and made the floor vibrate with contained power. Diagnostic screens bloomed green across the board, temperature readings, normal pressure, optimal. The AI reporting harmonics within acceptable parameters for the first time in 6 weeks. 2 minutes, 5 minutes. The 14-minute threshold approached like a countdown to execution. The room held its collective breath, 200 people watching screens that showed the same pattern as always, except this time the oscillation that should have been building toward resonance simply wasn't there. The damper absorbed the beating frequency before it could cascade invisible modification, performing exactly as Darius had calculated during midnight design sessions. 14 minutes, 38 seconds, the moment of previous failures. The engine continued running, temperature stable at 187 Fahrenheit, efficiency reading, climbing toward levels that shouldn't have been possible. Blake Thornton's voice emerged strangled with disbelief. Harmonic oscillation is completely suppressed, temperature holding steady. We're at 97.6% efficiency. That's 3.6% above theoretical maximum. 15 minutes. 20. The test continued past any reasonable demonstration requirement, Victoria unable to order shutdown, because stopping now would mean admitting success, and success meant confronting every assumption she'd built her career upon. At 30 minutes, Heinrich Schmidt began slow, methodical applause that built as others joined engineers and executives and German investors, recognizing that they were witnessing problem-solving at a level that transcended credentials and accessed something more fundamental about human capacity for innovation. Victoria stood frozen, her face cycling through emotions too complex to name. The engine ran flawlessly, screens showing performance that exceeded 6 years of development, goals all achieved through a modification installed by someone she'd dismissed as unqualified, someone she'd threatened with arrest, someone who'd just proven that excellence wasn't gate-kept by degrees, but by understanding and effort and willingness to see problems clearly. Blake Thornton broke the silence. We should shut it down. We've proven the modification works. No. Victoria's voice came out barely above a whisper. Let it run. I want to see how long it operates. 40 minutes. 50. The engine settled into performance that looked less like testing and more like destiny fulfilling itself, German precision and American innovation finally communicating through the translator Darius had provided. The room gradually relaxed, tension releasing, as success became undeniable, conversations starting in quiet tones that built toward normal volume. Heinrich approached Darius at the 1-hour mark, extending his hand in formal greeting that acknowledged equal status regardless of job titles. Mr. Holloway Autobahn Ventures would like to retain you as consulting engineer for our European operations. 3-month assignment, all expenses paid, consulting fee of $50,000. Will you accept? Victoria made a sound that might have been protest or possibly just the noise someone makes when their reality inverts. Darius met her eyes across the lab, saw recognition forming. Their understanding that she'd built a system designed to filter out exactly the kind of talent that had just saved her company. That depends on Ms. Prescott. She threatened criminal prosecution. I'd prefer not to consult from jail. Heinrich turned toward Victoria with expression that suggested patience exhausted. Mr. Prescott, I believe we need private conversation about investment terms and personnel decisions. Your engineers, he gestured toward the still-running engine, have failed for 6 weeks. Your janitors succeeded in one night. This suggests problems with how you evaluate competence. We will discuss. The room emptied gradually, people filing out with backward glances and whispered conversations that would become office legend within hours. Dr. Sullivan paused beside Darius on her way to the exit, squeezed his shoulder without speaking, her eyes carrying relief mixed with vindication. Blake Thornton was the last engineer to leave, stopping in front of Darius, with expression combining embarrassment and something that might have been respect. I owe you an apology. Yesterday when Victoria shut you down in the meeting, I should have said something. Should have at least considered that you might know what you were talking about. You did what most people do, trusted credentials over claims. It's not personal, it's just systemic. That doesn't make it right. Blake extended his hand. If you end up staying at Vanguard, I'd like to learn from you. How to diagnose by sound and intuition instead of just running algorithms. Darius shook his hand, recognized the olive branch for what it was, understood that Blake represented the better impulses that got suppressed by systems designed to reward conformity over curiosity. My grandfather taught me, listen with your hands, not just your ears. Machines tell you everything if you pay attention. Victoria's office at 243 felt like neutral territory claimed by occupying forces. Heinrich and his delegation arranged on one side of the conference table, Victoria isolated on the other. Darius standing near the window, uncertain whether he was witness or defendant. The city stretched below wealth and ambition, stacked vertically in glass towers that reflected afternoon sun with casual arrogance. Heinrich spoke first, German accent, making each word feel weighted with consideration. Ms. Prescott Autobahn Ventures is prepared to proceed with Series B funding. $127 million as originally discussed. Victoria's exhale carried 6 weeks of tension, finding release. Thank you, Heinrich. I appreciate. However, the words stopped her like a physical barrier. We have 3 non-negotiable conditions. First, Mr. Holloway receives immediate promotion to Director of Engineering Innovation, minimum salary, $160,000 equity package, comparable to senior technical leadership. Victoria's face went through several expressions before settling on controlled neutrality. That's highly irregular. He doesn't have formal engineering degree, hasn't gone through our promotion protocols. He solved 6-week crisis in one night. Your protocols clearly failed. This is condition 1. Second, Heinrich continued without pause. Independent audit of all technical submissions rejected since 2017. Any ideas deemed valid by external engineering review will be implemented with retroactive compensation to submitters. Victoria opened her mouth closed. It processed implications of having outside evaluators examine her decision-making over 8 years. Her hands gripped the armrests of her chair with visible force. Third, Heinrich looked directly at Darius. Autobahn receives board seat with veto power over senior personnel decisions. We will not permit another situation where qualified engineers push maintenance carts because of credential prejudice. The silence stretched long enough that distant traffic sounds filtered through supposedly soundproof windows. Victoria's breathing had gone shallow, chest rising and falling with barely controlled emotion that could have been rage or humiliation, or possibly the early stages of understanding that her assumptions had consequences. Those terms are acceptable. Her voice emerged flat, defeated, someone who just watched their empire survive only by accepting foreign governance. Mr. Holloway, consider yourself Director of Engineering Innovation effective immediately. Report Monday morning for onboarding. Darius nodded, processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. 48 hours ago, he'd been invisible maintenance worker facing termination. Now he held senior leadership position at a company valued at $800 million salary that would lift him and Ivy out of poverty overnight, equity that could become life-changing wealth if Vanguard succeeded. But the victory felt incomplete, a personal triumph that left systemic problems mostly intact. I have conditions of my own. Victoria's head snapped up, eyes flashing with anger at his audacity. You're in no position to Dr. Margaret Sullivan is promoted to VP of Quality Assurance. She's protected this company's technical integrity while everyone else focused on credentials. She deserves recognition. Heinrich nodded approval. Victoria's jaw worked soundlessly before she managed words. Agreed. Anything else? The 73 rejected submissions Dr. Sullivan documented. I want those people contacted personally. Apologized to. Offered positions if they're qualified. Compensated for ideas you stole and implemented without credit. We didn't steal. You took their intellectual labor and discarded it because they didn't have the right pedigree. That's theft of a different kind. Makes it right. Victoria stood, moved to the window, stared out at the valley that had built empires on innovation, while simultaneously gatekeeping access to innovation based on increasingly arbitrary credentials. When she turned back, her face had rearranged itself into something that looked almost like vulnerability. Why did you do it? Risk everything, career and freedom, for a company that treated you like garbage. Darius thought about Ivy asking if he'd fix the machine, about Mrs. Foster watching neighborhood kids for rates that barely covered electricity, about his mother dying because insurance classified life-saving treatment as optional, about Isaiah Holloway teaching him that engines don't care about skin color, but people do, and the gap between those two facts creates the space where injustice flourishes. Because 96 people were about to lose their jobs through no fault of their own. Because my daughter needs to see that invisible doesn't mean powerless. Because someone had to prove that talent exists everywhere, but opportunity doesn't. And maybe if I proved it loud enough, the system might bend a little bit toward justice. Victoria absorbed this expression, suggesting she was encountering a concept that challenged frameworks she'd spent decades building. When she spoke again, her voice carried something that might have been respect or possibly just exhaustion. I'll make the calls personally. The 73 people, I'll apologize and offer restitution. But I need you to understand, I built this company because my father's business collapsed when he trusted the wrong people. He had no systems, no verification, just gut instinct and friendship. When his CFO embezzled 4.7 million, it destroyed him. I vowed never to make that mistake. Only trust-proven competence, verifiable credentials, documented excellence. Your father's mistake wasn't trusting people without credentials. Darius moved toward the door, ready to leave this office and collect his daughter, and begin processing how fundamentally his life had just transformed. His mistake was trusting character instead of competence. Those aren't the same thing, and credentials don't prove either one. He left her there, descended through 40 floors of recently saved jobs, emerged onto Palo Alto streets where afternoon had softened toward evening. His phone showed 417. Ivy would be wondering if he'd won or lost, if dreams bigger than the sky had manifested or evaporated. The BART train carried him home through the tunnel under the bay, through stations where people lived stacked lives in cities built vertically because horizontal expansion had been exhausted. Oakland at 543 felt different somehow, same streets and same poverty, but carrying possibility that hadn't existed this morning. Mrs. Foster opened her door before he could knock, Ivy launching herself at him with velocity that nearly knocked him backward into the hallway. Did you win? Did you fix it? He picked her up, despite her getting too big for that, carried her inside, while Mrs. Foster smiled with understanding that this was a moment requiring witness. I fixed it. The engine works, and they promoted me. I'm a director now. We're going to be okay, Ladybug. Ivy pulled back to study his face, searching for confirmation that this wasn't a dream or a mistake. We can go to the Science Museum. We can go to the Science Museum every weekend if you want. And I don't have to leave school. The question drove a spike through his chest, reminder that 7-year-olds shouldn't have to worry about housing stability and school continuity, but his daughter had learned those concerns earlier than most. You're not leaving school. We're staying right here in Oakland. Same apartment, same missus Foster, same everything except Daddy's job and our bank account. Ivy's hug tightened with relief that children shouldn't have to feel. Mrs. Foster wiped her eyes with a tissue pulled from seemingly nowhere, moved to the kitchen with muttered explanation about making tea nobody needed, but everyone wanted. Later that evening after dinner, that was barely more elaborate than usual because Darius's new salary wouldn't start for another 2 weeks after Ivy had fallen asleep mid-sentence, telling him about the dream she'd had where he fixed machines that helped everyone. Darius sat at his kitchen table with his laptop open to an email from Victoria. Subject line: implementation plan. The body outline next steps: formal promotion paperwork, equity grant documentation, audit procedures for the 73 rejected submissions, timeline for personal apologies and restitution offers. The language remained professional, but carried undertones of someone forced to confront that their survival had required help from a source they'd refused to see. A second email arrived at 9:23 from Dr. Sullivan. You magnificent bastard, you actually did it. VP of QA. Me. After 7 rejections in 27 years. Drinks on me when this settles down. Which might be never, but the offer stands. A third email at 9:41 from Blake Thornton. Team meeting Monday 10 a.m. I'm telling everyone you're my boss now in every way that matters. Looking forward to learning from you. Darius closed the laptop, moved to the window where Oakland spread below in patterns of light that marked lives being lived in circumstances ranging from comfortable to desperate. Somewhere in this city were 73 other people who'd been told they didn't belong, whose ideas had been rejected, whose talent had been filtered through systems designed to preserve hierarchy disguised as meritocracy. Starting Monday, he'd help change that. Not fix it completely, not solve systemic problems with one promotion, but bend the trajectory a few degrees toward justice and see what happened over time as those few degrees were compounded into meaningful transformation. His phone buzzed, unknown number. He answered with wariness learned from years of bill collectors and scam calls. Mr. Holloway, this is Andrea Yates from TechCrunch. I'd like to interview you about what happened at Vanguard Dynamics today. Word is you solved a 6-week crisis that had stumped MIT engineers despite working as maintenance. That's a hell of a story. I'm not interested in publicity. I just want to do my job. The story's getting out with or without you. Better to control the narrative than let others define it. We go to press Monday morning. You have until Sunday evening to decide if you want your voice included. She ended the call before he could respond, leaving him holding a phone that represented a choice about visibility and vulnerability. The story would spread regardless. Question was whether he wanted to shape its telling or let others impose their interpretations. He thought about Ivy's question earlier. Can we go to the Science Museum? Thought about all the other children who'd been told their dreams were too big, their ambitions unrealistic, their potential limited by zip codes and skin color and family wealth. Thought about Gregory Whitmore's condescension and Victoria's systematic exclusion and the 73 rejected submissions gathering digital dust. If his story could crack open doors for other people, maybe publicity was price worth paying. Bigger than the sky meant accepting the weight that came with visibility, the responsibility that followed success, the obligation to transform personal victory into systemic change. He'd decide by Sunday. For now, he had Saturday with Ivy first morning in 4 years, where he'd wake without the immediate panic of checking bank balances and calculating how to stretch $40 into grocery budget and wondering which bill he could delay without losing essential services. Monday would bring its own challenges, learning to navigate executive leadership managing people who'd recently dismissed him as janitor, implementing reforms that would face resistance from those invested in preserving existing hierarchies. But Monday was 2 days away. Tonight, he had his daughter sleeping peacefully in the apartment. They wouldn't lose dreams bigger than the sky, finally aligning with possibilities approaching bigger than sky achievement. The engine that had trapped him in poverty for 4 years now transformed into the mechanism of his liberation. He pulled the blanket higher on Ivy's sleeping form, kissed her forehead where baby's softness still persisted, whispered words that might have been prayer or promise, or possibly just exhausted gratitude, that physics remained consistent and effort combined with knowledge could still overcome systems designed to keep people trapped in places that serve power's convenience. Tomorrow would take care of itself. The engine ran. The deal was saved. 96 jobs preserved. 73 people about to receive overdue recognition. And one 7-year-old girl who taught her father that scared means it matters and do it anyway could finally stop worrying about things children shouldn't have to worry about. That felt like enough for one day. The rest could wait. Sunday morning arrived with fog thick enough to render Oakland's skyline into suggestion rather than certainty. Darius woke at 7:18 to find Ivy already awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by colored pencils and notebook paper, drawing what appeared to be a detailed schematic of the X-47 engine, based entirely on his descriptions and her 7-year-old interpretation of mechanical engineering. "Daddy, can we go to the Science Museum today? You said we could go every weekend now." The promise felt simultaneously too extravagant and perfectly reasonable given the transformation 48 hours had wrought. His phone showed 3 new emails overnight, all from TechCrunch's Andrea Yates, with increasingly specific questions about timeline, his educational background. Victoria's response. The deadline she'd given him was 7 p.m. tonight, 14 hours to decide whether his story became public narrative or remained private victory. "Get dressed, Ladybug. Museum opens at 10. The California Academy of Sciences occupied prime real estate in Golden Gate Park, San Francisco's commitment to making education accessible, manifesting in architecture designed to inspire wonder. Ivy gravitated immediately toward the planetarium show, exploring exoplanet detection. She absorbed every detail with focus that reminded Darius uncomfortably of himself at that age before life had taught him that intelligence without opportunity was just another form of frustration. After the show, they wandered through exhibits on earthquake geology and climate systems, while Ivy peppered him with questions about plate tectonics and carbon cycles. Other parents noticed the depth of her knowledge. A woman in expensive athletic wear approached as Ivy was explaining why the Richter scale had been replaced by moment magnitude. "Your daughter is remarkably bright. Does she attend a gifted program?" Darius felt the familiar tension. "She's in public school. Oakland." The woman's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, sympathy mixing with the particular discomfort of privileged people confronting poverty's constraints on talent. "Well, she's clearly destined for great things." After she left, Ivy tugged his sleeve. "Why did she look sad when you said Oakland?" "Because some people think where you're from determines where you'll go. They're wrong, but changing their minds takes more work than it should." At 2:30, they stood in front of the rainforest exhibit. Ivy pressed her face against the glass, watching poison dart frogs navigate artificial leaves. "Daddy, when you were my age, did you know you'd be an engineer?" The question pulled him back 30 years to a different version of this museum, Isaiah Holloway bringing him here on rare days off from Ford. "I knew I liked fixing things. Didn't know what that would become." "When you fixed the engine Friday, were you scared?" Honesty felt more important than comfort. "Terrified. I thought I might go to jail, lose my job, destroy our lives trying to prove I was right. But you did it anyway. Because you taught me that scared means it matters." Ivy turned from the exhibit, her expression carrying seriousness that children shouldn't need to master this early. "At school, kids say their parents work at Google and Apple. I used to not know what to say because you cleaned floors. Now what do I tell them?" The question excavated complexity he hadn't fully processed, the way his promotion simultaneously validated his competence and revealed how much his perceived failure had weighed on his daughter. "Tell them your dad solves problems other people can't. Tell them credentials matter less than capability." That's a lot of words for making fun of someone's at lunch. Her pragmatism cut through his philosophical distance, reminder that 7-year-olds lived in concrete reality where economic class manifested through social hierarchy and symbolic violence wearing friendly faces. They left the museum at 4:15. His phone showed 2 more emails from Andrea Yates and one from an unfamiliar address with subject line, "Legal consultation regarding Vanguard Dynamics employment." He opened the unfamiliar email first. Jennifer Patterson, an attorney with Feldman and Associates who specialized in employment law, wanted to discuss potential wrongful termination claims given Victoria's threatened prosecution. The email noted that Darius's documentation of rejected submissions might constitute evidence of systemic discrimination actionable under federal statute. The prospect of legal action felt simultaneously validating and exhausting. But the 73 other people whose ideas had been rejected might benefit from legal pressure that forced more than just voluntary reform. He typed a response to Andrea Yates, "I'll give you an interview, but I need you to understand this isn't about one villain and one hero. It's about systems that filter competence through arbitrary gates. If your article reduces this to simple morality tale, you'll miss the actual story." Her response came within 3 minutes. "Come to our office tonight, 7 p.m., bring documentation." TechCrunch's San Francisco office occupied the 8th floor of a building near the Embarcadero. Andrea Yates was younger than her professional reputation suggested, 32 at most, wearing jeans and a t-shirt that said, "Citation needed," in academic journal formatting. "You brought documents." "Everything. The 73 rejected submissions. Statistical analysis showing 91% rejection rate for people of color versus 8% for white engineers. Victoria's emails creating the credential filter. My own 4 rejected reports. Dr. Sullivan's documentation of opportunity cost $6.2 million in lost efficiencies from discarded ideas." Andrea's eyes widened as she flipped through the folder. "This is systemic discrimination documented across 8 years. Why didn't you sue?" "Because lawsuits take years and I needed to feed my daughter every day." "Because whistleblower protections are theoretical until you test them in court, and I couldn't afford to be test case." "Because sometimes survival requires accepting injustice while waiting for a moment when you have leverage to demand change." She spent 40 minutes asking questions that demonstrated real research, understood the technical details, and the social dynamics. The article she outlined would examine broader patterns, use Vanguard as case study for how tech industry's obsession with elite credentials created artificial scarcity while wasting talent. One more question. Victoria could have handled Friday multiple ways. She could have had you arrested, could have refused to test the engine. Instead, she eventually promoted you. What changed in her perspective? Darius thought about Victoria's face when the engine ran past 14 minutes. She realized that being right about process while wrong about outcome is just another form of failure. That survival sometimes requires accepting help from sources you've refused to see. The interview concluded at 9:20. Andrea promised the article would run Monday morning with full documentation that she'd position this as systemic analysis rather than personal vindication. Monday morning broke clear and bright. Darius dressed in clothes that suddenly felt inadequate for director-level position, khakis and button-down that had been fine for maintenance work, but seemed shabby for executive leadership. A problem to solve later with his first real paycheck. The TechCrunch article went live at 6 a.m. Darius read it on the BART train while Ivy dozed against his shoulder. Andrea had structured it perfectly, opening with the dramatic Friday demonstration before pulling back to examine systemic patterns, weaving together his story with data about credential filtering across tech industry. The headline read, "The 6-2M Cost of Credential Prejudice: How Silicon Valley's Degree Obsession Wastes Talent." By 7:15, when Darius reached Vanguard's lobby, the article had been shared 8,000 times, picked up by Bloomberg and Forbes and Wall Street Journal, transformed into broader conversation about education, opportunity, and arbitrary barriers. Security recognized him immediately, confusion visible as they tried to reconcile maintenance worker they'd waved through for 4 years with director-level executive whose photo now appeared in national publications. His new office occupied corner space 2 doors from Victoria's windows, providing views that stretched toward Stanford campus and mountains beyond. Dr. Sullivan appeared at 7:53 carrying 2 coffees. "Congratulations on the article. Also, fair warning, Victoria's been in emergency damage control meetings since 6:30. Board is concerned about reputational impact." The article was accurate. Documentation supports every claim. Accurate and devastating aren't mutually exclusive. You just publicly expose that Vanguard systematically discriminated for 8 years. That creates legal exposure. Blake Thornton knocked at 8:03. "The engineering team wants to meet at 10. Everyone wants to hear how you diagnosed the failure when we missed it for 6 weeks." "I'll be there, but Blake, I'm not your boss. We're colleagues with different areas of focus. Collaborative structure, not hierarchical." Blake's shoulders relaxed. "That's not how Victoria usually structures leadership roles." "I'm not Victoria." The 10 a.m. engineering meeting occupied the main conference room, 27 people arranged around a table designed for 15. Rachel Whitmore started immediately. "Darius, I want to apologize for that comment about hardworking people. I didn't realize how condescending it sounded until I read the article this morning." Apology accepted. The thing about systemic prejudice is that it operates through people who think they're being polite. Recognizing it is first step. The meeting evolved into technical deep dive that lasted 90 minutes. Engineers asking questions about diagnostic methodology, while Darius tried to articulate knowledge that existed partly in conscious thought, but mostly in muscle memory and accumulated experience. After the meeting dispersed, Darius returned to his office to find Victoria waiting. She'd aged visibly since Friday, new lines around her eyes suggesting sleep had been scarce. "Close the door." He complied, took his seat, waited. "The article is causing significant reputational damage. Board received 47 calls from institutional investors concerned about discrimination liability. Legal team estimates potential exposure from class action, lawsuit at 15 to 30 million. Then maybe you should have thought about legal exposure before building systems that systematically discriminated for 8 years. Victoria's jaw tightened. "I built those systems to protect this company after my father's business collapsed from trusting the wrong people." "Your father trusted an embezzler. I'm not an embezzler. The 73 people you rejected aren't embezzlers. We're engineers who happen to lack credentials you arbitrarily decided were prerequisites for being heard. So you're planning to destroy the company you just saved." "I'm planning to ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Whether that requires lawsuit depends on how seriously you take reform." Which is your belief that credentials prove competence and their absence proves incompetence. That belief is factually wrong and morally corrosive until you genuinely understand that no policy change will stick. Victoria stood, moved to the window. When she turned back, her expression had shifted into something that looked almost vulnerable. "My father died 3 years ago. Dementia. Toward the end, he didn't remember the embezzlement. Just kept asking why I wouldn't visit, why I was so angry. I realized I'd spent 20 years building my life as reaction to his failure. And now you're telling me that fear led me to create different mistakes that are just as destructive. The confession felt like witnessing someone's therapy session. Fear is reasonable response to trauma, but trauma-based decision-making produces systems designed to prevent past problems while creating new ones. So what do you want? Independent oversight, quarterly audits by external reviewers, blind review process where technical merit is evaluated before credentials are revealed, mandatory training for all management, transparent reporting on diversity of idea sources. Victoria returned to her chair. That's more extensive than what Heinrich required. Heinrich required minimum for him to feel comfortable investing. I'm outlining what's necessary for actual cultural transformation. You can implement it voluntarily or wait for lawsuit to force it. She left without verbal agreement, but her shoulders carried resignation that suggested compliance. The week accelerated into pattern of meetings and decisions. Wednesday brought the first reform implementation meeting. Thursday featured difficult conversation with 3 engineers who'd been most vocal about credential requirements, resistance manifesting through procedural objections. Friday afternoon, Jennifer Patterson arrived for the legal consultation Sullivan had arranged. She spent 2 hours reviewing documentation before delivering assessment. You have the strongest systemic discrimination case I've seen in 6 years. 8 years of documented filtering, statistical disparities, Victoria's emails explicitly creating the discriminatory system. The question is whether winning serves your objectives. What are the downsides? Years of litigation, media scrutiny of your entire life. Victoria's legal team will investigate everything trying to undermine your credibility. Discovery will be invasive and exhausting. Even if you win, appeals could extend the process for 5 years. What are the upsides? Forcing genuine institutional change through court-ordered consent decree, creating legal precedent, securing compensation for everyone whose ideas were stolen, sending signal to tech industry that systemic discrimination has consequences, and personally financial settlement that would secure your daughter's future. The calculation balanced present comfort against future impact. His promotion solved his immediate problems, but left structures intact that would harm others. File the paperwork, class action on behalf of all 73 rejected employees. I'll be lead plaintiff. Patterson nodded. This goes public next week. Prepare yourself for intense media attention. After she left, Darius sat watching afternoon sun paint the valley gold and amber. Lawsuit meant defining himself by conflict for years, but it also meant preventing future repetition, meant forcing accountability that voluntary reform could never guarantee. Dr. Sullivan appeared with bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. Heard Patterson left. Figured you could use this. It's 3:30 in the afternoon, and you just committed to years of brutal litigation. She poured 2 fingers in each glass. To fighting battles that need fighting even when avoiding them would be easier. The weekend brought unexpected complications. Television interview requests from 3 major networks, invitation to speak at Stanford's engineering school. Darius accepted. Stanford declined the television appearances. Monday brought the lawsuit's public announcement press conference, where Patterson outlined the case while Darius and 11 other named plaintiffs stood behind her. Media coverage was immediate and extensive. Vanguard's stock dropped 4%, recovering 3% by market close. Discovery demands started arriving within days, hundreds of pages designed to overwhelm plaintiffs into settlement. Darius spent hours each evening reviewing depositions, identifying relevant emails, reconstructing timeline. The Munich trip arrived as welcome break, 3 weeks of consulting work that paid $50,000. Heinrich had arranged family accommodations. Ivy could join him without disruption to her schoolwork. Bavarian autumn carried different quality than California. The Autobahn facilities occupied converted industrial complex outside Munich proper. Heinrich's team included 12 engineers, all initially skeptical about American consultant whose primary qualification appeared to be solving one problem through intuition. The skepticism lasted approximately 4 hours until Darius diagnosed harmonic resonance issue in their prototype electric motor that had been producing inconsistent performance for 3 months. The fix required repositioning 2 mounting points by 7 millimeters. After that diagnosis, resistance evaporated. Ivy thrived on the Munich adventure. She picked up German phrases with 7-year-old fluency, started explaining to museum visitors how diesel engines worked. Heinrich laughed and commented that she had career in either technical design or science fiction. On their final evening, Heinrich invited them to his home for dinner. The conversation ranged from technical discussions to more personal territory about balancing career with family responsibility. You made very difficult choice, Heinrich observed. coming forward about discrimination knowing it would create years of conflict. Easier to accept promotion and move on. Easier for me, not easier for next person Victoria decides is unqualified. Not easier for my daughter who'd learn that accepting injustice is price of personal success. Heinrich's wife smiled. This is good lesson for Ivy. That fighting for others even when it costs you personally is what separates comfortable life from meaningful one. Ivy spoke up with 7-year-old directness. Daddy says dreams are bigger than the sky. That means doing hard things because they matter. Precisely, Heinrich raised his wine glass, to doing hard things because they matter. The flight back to Oakland carried different emotional weight, returned to litigation and reform battles, and media attention that had become exhausting backdrop. Patterson's latest update, Vanguard had filed motion to dismiss, claiming his promotion demonstrated no discrimination, existed legal argument so transparently cynical that Patterson expected the judge to reject it. Tuesday brought return to Vanguard and peculiar experience of being simultaneously celebrated executive and plaintiff in active litigation. People's interactions carried tension of uncertainty about appropriate boundaries. The lawsuit progressed through discovery's grinding machinery. Deposition in December lasted 7 hours, Vanguard's attorneys asking questions designed to portray him as bitter employee seeking revenge rather than talented engineer responding to systemic injustice. Mr. Holloway, isn't it true that you chose maintenance work over engineering positions? The attorney was a middle-aged white man whose expensive suit suggested he'd never experienced poverty firsthand. I chose maintenance work because it provided steady income with hours that allowed me to raise my daughter as single parent. The discrimination wasn't refusing to accommodate my childcare needs. The discrimination was rejecting technically valid engineering ideas because I held maintenance position rather than engineering title. The deposition continued in similar vein. Patterson objected frequently, building record for trial, while allowing Darius to explain how systemic prejudice operated. December became January. The lawsuit's class had grown to 47 named plaintiffs. Patterson remained optimistic, noting that Vanguard's motion to dismiss had been denied and discovery was revealing even more extensive patterns. Vanguard's voluntary reforms were showing measurable impact. The blind review system had generated 91 submissions in 4 months, 23, deemed promising enough to implement, 8 already showing positive results. Victoria's transformation remained incomplete, but visible. She attended mandatory training with apparent sincerity, began actively soliciting input from employees across organizational hierarchy. Whether the change was sustainable or merely strategic response to legal pressure remained uncertain. February brought Stanford Speech Auditorium, filled with 300 engineering students and faculty. Darius had prepared extensively, wanting to convey complexity rather than simplistic triumph narrative. Credentials have value, he told the audience. They signal commitment, demonstrate baseline knowledge, open doors. I'm not arguing against education. I'm arguing that credentials should be starting point for evaluation, not ending point. That someone with associate's degree and a decade of hands-on experience might know things that someone with PhD doesn't. One student asked with edge whether Darius was suggesting Stanford degrees were worthless. I'm suggesting Stanford degrees are valuable but not sufficient. That intelligence exists in people who couldn't afford Stanford. Your Stanford degree gives you advantages I didn't have. Recognition of those advantages should produce humility, not defensiveness. The response drew applause from portions of audience, while others sat in uncomfortable silence. The lawsuit reached settlement negotiations in March. Vanguard's initial offer was $7 million split among 47 plaintiffs, plus agreement to maintain reforms for 5 years. Patterson dismissed it as inadequate. They're betting that 5 years is long enough for public attention to fade. We need permanent structural oversight. Negotiations extended through April. The final settlement emerged in May, $14.3 million, divided among plaintiffs plus 7-year consent decree, requiring continued blind review protocols, quarterly independent audits, transparent reporting, and $100,000 penalty for any violation. Patterson had also secured provision requiring Vanguard to fund scholarship program for community college students pursuing engineering careers, 5 full-ride scholarships annually for 10 years, named after Isaiah Holloway. Darius's individual settlement amounted to $1.8 million after legal fees. The money felt simultaneously more than fair and inadequate compensation for 4 years of humiliation and systematic exclusion. The consent decree signing occurred in federal courthouse in San Francisco. Victoria attended with her legal team, signing documents that bound Vanguard to structural reforms. Her face carried no satisfaction, only resignation. After the signing, Victoria approached Darius in courthouse hallway. I want to tell you something that's not in any legal document. You were right about credentials being signal rather than proof, about systems that waste talent, about fear creating worse mistakes than the ones it tries to prevent. I built those systems because I was terrified of my father's failure. Now I'm spending the rest of my career trying to undo what fear made me create. The admission was more vulnerable than Darius had expected. Change is harder than maintaining status quo. What matters is whether you sustain the transformation after legal pressure ends. The monitor helps with that. Having external oversight means I can't rationalize backsliding when it gets difficult. They parted without additional words, two people who'd been antagonist and victim, now occupying more ambiguous relationship. The settlement distributed through late summer. Darius paid off every debt, medical bills from Sienna's accident, student loans, from his abbreviated MIT education, credit card balances accumulated through 4 years of poverty, and experienced the peculiar lightness of liberation from economic anxiety. Mrs. Foster's retirement gift was rental deposit plus 6 months advance payment on one-bedroom apartment in the same building. She cried when Darius handed her the check, both understanding that money represented more than transaction. The Isaiah Holloway Scholarship Fund launched in September with ceremony at Oakland Community College, 5 students selected through blind review. Ivy attended 7, turning 8, understanding enough to recognize her great-grandfather's legacy was being honored. One scholarship recipient was 19-year-old Latoya Jenkins, former Vanguard administrative assistant, whose server cooling idea had been rejected in 2019. She'd left Vanguard last year thinking she wasn't smart enough, returned after settlement as junior systems analyst. My grandmother cleaned houses for 40 years, never went past 8th grade, but she could fix anything. She'd look at something broken and just know what was wrong. That intelligence is real even though no college recognized it. This scholarship says we see you, we value you, your path matters even if it doesn't look like everyone else's. The audience stood in ovation, recognition that what had begun as lawsuit about one company's discrimination had evolved into broader validation. 18 months after the engine that changed everything, Darius stood on beach at Stinson with Ivy watching sunset paint the Pacific in colors that defied naming. Ivy had grown taller, lost another tooth, developed passion for marine biology. Daddy, when I'm grown up, will people respect me because of what I know or because of where I went to school? The question contained awareness beyond her 8 years. Darius chose honesty over comfort. Some people will judge you by credentials. Others will judge you by capability. The world's getting better at recognizing the difference, but slowly. Your job is to be so good at what you do that even credential-focused people can't ignore your competence. Like you fixed the engine? Like I fixed the engine. Excellence forces recognition eventually, but you shouldn't have to be exceptional just to be seen as adequate. Ivy picked up a piece of driftwood. You changed things, though. The lawsuit and the scholarship. So maybe I won't have to fight as hard. Maybe, I hope so. But probably you'll face different versions of the same fight. Change happens slowly across generations through thousands of small victories that accumulate into transformation. Bigger than the sky. Bigger than the sky. He pulled her close. Always bigger than the sky. They walked the beach until darkness made footing uncertain, then drove back to Oakland. The apartment waited, small but sufficient, marked by improvements his settlement money had funded. Sienna's photo watched from the shelf. He'd never know if she'd be proud, but the question mattered less now than ensuring Ivy grew up believing that invisible didn't mean powerless. Monday would bring new challenges, continue to reform implementation, consent decree, monitoring, consulting assignment in Detroit. But Monday was 40 hours away. The engine ran perfectly now, powering autonomous vehicles across 12 countries. But the real achievement wasn't mechanical success. It was proving that excellence existed in people systems had been designed to ignore that credentials signaled possibility, but didn't determine capability. One person's victory was incomplete without structural change. He climbed out and welded the ladder in place so others could follow, fought to ensure the climb wouldn't be as steep for those who came next. Whether that was enough remained uncertain, but it was what he could do. And sometimes enough was precisely that, sufficient for the moment while acknowledging more remained. Ivy's breathing deepened into sleep. Darius watched her for long minutes, memorizing this moment between past vindication and future uncertainty, between the life they'd survived and the life they were building. The city lights spread below millions of people navigating struggles between poverty and prosperity, between being seen and being ignored. Each light represented possibilities, some fulfilled and others deferred. Change happened slowly, but it happened when enough people refused to accept that current arrangements were natural or inevitable. The engine had been one fight, the lawsuit another, the scholarship fund a third. How many more fights remained, Darius didn't know. But he knew he'd keep fighting, keep building foundations for transformation that might not complete in his lifetime, but would accumulate toward justice across generations. Bigger than the sky wasn't destination. It was direction, daily choice to reach higher than seemed possible, to demand more than systems wanted to provide. The night deepened. The city continued its restless evolution. And in a small apartment, a father watched his daughter sleep and promised that this fight would matter, that their struggle would bend the world's trajectory, however slightly, toward justice. Not a perfect ending wrapped in triumphant resolution, but an honest one acknowledging that victories were partial, that systems resisted transformation, that the work of justice was never truly finished. Just continued generation after generation by people who refused to accept that invisible meant powerless, or that dreams bigger than the sky required anything less than actions that matched their ambition.